During a Senate hearing, we actually learned something in a follow up testimony to Senator Markey. Waymo revealed some interesting data. A local San Francisco paper, they dug and got some data. Uber says they don't want to be in the asset business, but yet we get an announcement they're going into the asset business. Then in New York, what's going on? The governor pulled a complete 180. Yes, I like AVs. Oh no, AVs are bad. That's not happened. That's your neck of the woods. There's a lot going on, but let's start with the Waymo data. What do you make of this data we learned?
To get something valuable out of any Senate hearing is a bit of a stretch. And in this case, just to be clear, it didn't happen at the hearing itself, where basically the Waymo chief safety officer had kind of an embarrassing performance. Senator Markey had him on his heels and talking about the remote assistance agents and some of them being located in the Philippines, which obviously there was grandstanding about that. But the benefit to us here on Autonomy Markets is we got something we've been wanting for a while, which is more data, right? And the more data that we got was Waymo actually disclosing to the senator, and obviously in a memo that was made public, that there are only 70 remote assistant agents that are on duty worldwide, half of them which are in the Philippines, which we'll get to next. But let's first talk about this 70 and by the way, Waymo also updated and said they now have 3,000 cars on the road. So there's only 70 remote assistant agents servicing as a backup the 3,000 cars on the road. What is your reaction to that?
My reaction is you need to run for Senate because we've been trying to get this information for a long time. So if you were a sitting member of Congress, you could have given it to us. But all kidding aside, it's impressive. You have 3,000 vehicles on the road and you have 70 remote assistance operators. And the interesting thing in the letter to Senator Markey, those 70 individuals are not online all the time. So in theory, maybe there's 40 online at one time, 50 online at a time. It's really, truly impressive. And it tells you the quality of the Waymo stack and how far truly advanced it is.
Look, I've had past discussions with some of these Chinese companies that Uber has recently put forth as their partners as being, effectively equivalent to Waymo and, specifically maybe Pony. And what I've heard in China, even in what the regulators in China require in terms of remote safety agents to cars on the road, it is a much higher ratio, meaning many more remote people to the autonomous cars that are on the road than what Waymo has basically disclosed. I'm actually just absolutely shocked that the number is as low as it is. Whether it's 40 or 70, I don't care if it's 100. I would have been shocked by 100. The economics there and the kind of I don't want to say proof, but like the validation that autonomy is real. Anyone out there saying, oh, these are just remote drivers driving this car, like unless they're absolutely lying, that goes out the window, right? 3,000 autonomous cars, right? Obviously, they're not always on the road at the same time, but I don't even care. Cut that in half. Cut that, by 70%. That number of cars for that number of remote drivers is such to me, a positive thing about this industry and kind of where the economics can go for it.
100%. And I'll say it very bluntly and very loudly. It's something Waymo should tout. They should be proud of. You have individuals on both sides of the equation. Oh, their tech's not advanced. And you and I know people pile on. But the data that was released to the United States Senate tells you that Waymo is clearly ahead and clearly advanced. And frankly, it is fucking impressive.
Now, look, the flip side of this is why are they bothering having half of these 70 people being in the Philippines? Like, literally, what is the cost savings that are possible? And like, even if you're like getting ready to scale up, at this point, when you're trying to get approvals, and we'll get to New York later, like, why would you have that risk, which obviously was exploited by Senator Markey at a senator hearing, of having half in Philippines? Is it really that hard to find another 35 remote assistance agents in the United States of America?
No, and there's companies such as Transdev, which is a Waymo partner, that can do that. It goes back to this unfortunate situation with Waymo and unforced errors. You have the remote assistance in the Philippines. Then you have the Chinese-made Zeekr, another unforced error. The pushback that we'll probably get, the time zone difference. Well, folks work the graveyard shift in America. There are individuals that work different odd hours, so we can have it here in America, and it would avoid that situation.
I mean, a key to the answer here might be another thing that I know you put your inspector hat on for in this response, which is, again, not shocking because I think I had heard this before, don't remember where, but that these are not, necessarily Waymo employees. This is a third party. So it's possible that Waymo contracted with this third party for these remote assistant agents, didn't have enough control over them. Just like, you could argue, like, when did Apple gain control over what was going on with his manufacturing partners? And it was the third party person that effectively hired the Philippines. You still, at your Waymo, you still need to have control over that, and know the kind of political ramifications that you had to deal with in front of the Senate.
That's why the inspector hat, it goes back to the fine print. All of the data that you and I discuss on this podcast is publicly available. We just go through with a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying glass in some cases. This goes back to your historical world. Well, checks and balances. Isn't it? Where's the checks and balance system as some of these decisions are being made? Because they could have avoided a lot of heartache, a lot of very negative press, and this now becomes a talking point for individuals and organizations that want to see autonomous vehicles stop. Look at this. They're sending jobs overseas. And it's just not a very good narrative.
Not good, but let's not lose the underlying positive here in terms of Waymo and, frankly, the industry. 70 remote assistant agents for 3,000 cars. I mean, clappy hat for that. Clappy hat for that, Grayson. Get the clappy hat out. That's amazing. And by the way, the 3,000 vehicles, the last update we had was 2,500. I've talked about it doubling to more than, 6,000, I think, vehicles by year end. So if there are 3,000 basically now, and everything we heard last week in terms of what's going to come out of the Mesa plant, what's going to come from Hyundai, well on their way to hitting my target.
The clappy hat's here. Waymo, you get the clap. You did a wonderful, wonderful job. Now, Walt, here's the question. We always look to benchmark things. Should this Waymo number, 70 to 3,000, be the new benchmark? And if so, should other robotaxi companies release the data so we can properly compare?
I don't know. If I'm Waymo, first of all, I'm not sure why you were sitting on this info. But absolutely, I'm like touting this, and anyone else that kind of emerges demanding that they also release what these ratios are, right? This is certainly a relative validation point to other players in the market. Anyway, well done. But that wasn't the only data we got from Waymo this week. There was an article in a newspaper called the San Francisco Gate, I believe. I think it was mostly talking about Uber. So we can kind of match this to some Waymo opportunities, but they were specifically touting the amount of revenue that Uber and Lyft generate for the airports, because it's $6 a ride and there's 10 million rides, and for last year 60 million to the airport, yada yada yada. Let's dissect some of the data. The San Francisco Gate said Uber and Lyft do about 1 million rides per month to the airport, so they're getting back to some type of pre-COVID levels. They're making some relationship there. There's obviously slower months. Let's assume it's at 800,000 per month when you kind of average out big months versus low months. And they also said that the airport represents about 15% of total rides for these companies. So if you just do basic math, 800,000 is 15% of about 5.3 million rides per month. So then you just take that, total rides, back out that 800, and you're left with 4.5 million non-airport rides that Uber and Lyft are doing. Now, we've seen, Yipit data and other people refer to Waymo being 20 to 25% of this San Francisco market, right? So if you just take that 4.5 million rides, which are the non-airport rides, because remember, Waymo doesn't have, or didn't have for most of 25, any type of real airport volume. So if you take 20 to 25% share, which is, what some of these data companies have referred to, of that 4.5 million, that implies that they're doing about, Waymo, 200 to 260,000 rides a week in San Francisco. Now, we also know that in Waymo's latest update, nationally, they're doing 400,000. So if you're using this math and look, there's always rounding and things like that. But if I'm doing my math right, I'm sure I can always screw up my math. Hopefully not. It basically implies that San Francisco is 50 to 60 to, a half to two-thirds of total Waymo rides nationally. I mean, does that surprise you?
No, especially when you look at the entire Bay Area going all the way down to San Jose now, because the Bay Area and the Valley are tech forwarded and they're early adopters. And let's not forget, that's where Waymo decided to launch their service. So, no, first market, first mover advantage, no surprise to it. Over time, will that number go down? Yes. The number that will go up, they're going to continue to eat into traditional rideshare, especially as they get to the garage. And if somehow, some way, they're able to get to the curb, you're going to watch that number go even higher.
I mean, you mentioned the Bay Area, and that's where maybe these numbers get a little funky because is it San Francisco? Like when people have talked about the 20 to 25%, I think they were referring to San Francisco proper as opposed to the Bay Area. So the numbers can be a little squirrely. But even if you go to the low end of that and even lower, you talk about like Waymo hitting scale. But if you're like all of your rides, or not all, but half of your rides are basically in San Francisco, then you again reflect back on what our friends at Uber said on the earnings call, which is like, oh, San Francisco is different than LA. We have tech forward people here and this, that, and the other thing, and saying that you can't extrapolate what the great people of San Francisco do to other cities around the country. This provides a little evidence to that, saying like, has Waymo really proved out if half of the rides are still basically in this first market? It's actually not the first market, but in San Francisco.
The reason why I believe that a majority of those rides are in that market, one, the individuals that live there, but two, I also think it's the market that has the most vehicles. And over time, as Nashville comes online, Miami opens to the public, other markets open to the public, you're going to see that number decline. You're going to see other markets uptick. And I'll go on here and make a prediction. I'll go on the record here and say that within the next 2 years, Miami will become a top 3 market for Waymo.
I mean, like at the end of the day, yeah, that's true. These numbers are only going to go down as a mix, but it's just, again, where are they today? Any bet. Let's talk about the bigger issue here with this math, which is now that they are getting to the airport, what this could actually do to rides. So let's go back to this airport data. Again, I know they said 1 million in the article, but let's just say it's on average 800,000 based on seasonality. Assume no growth, and let's just assume Waymo is going to capture 15% of those rides that are happening to and from the airport. So that equates to about 30,000 incremental rides per week on top of the 400,000 nationally that they're doing. So the San Francisco airport alone in this scenario could technically add like 7% growth to their weekly rides. Now, I don't know, in terms of, maybe you can refresh my memory. Can you drop off and pick up in Waymo? And obviously interested in your thoughts on, we know Waymo is still not in the ideal pick up and drop off locations, how much that impacts it.
Yes, as of today, if you have early rider access, you can get dropped off and picked up at the rack, which is the rental car center. So yes, it is about 11 to 12 minutes to go on the little choo-choo train, the electric train, to get over to the rack to get into it. I'll be there in 2 weeks. I will be taking a Waymo from the rack down to Silicon Valley when I give a talk with Don Burnett at Kodiak. So I'll let you know the experience firsthand. But yes, to me, it's a consistent experience that I will. And you know me, I don't like to walk. I want curbside. But to not have to deal with the Forrest Gump analogy of life is like a box of chocolates, you don't know what you're going to get, I will gladly take the little train, choo-choo train, for 12 minutes to get a consistent experience.
The bottom line is, based on this math, and people can make whatever assumptions they want, like opening up San Fran Airport alone can have like a 5% plus impact on rides. And let's be clear, like the average, revenue per ride to and from the airport is definitely going to be higher than their typical ride. So it's going to have a larger relative impact on revenue. These are the higher value rides that obviously they can get. And as I guess our listeners know, Waymo can also drop these customers off in the Bay Area. It's not just back and forth with San Francisco. It's opened up the region. So again, interesting data, and thanks to the intrepid reporters at the San Francisco gate for getting us that info.
Thanks for the data, and I'm looking forward to seeing as data grows, because we're going to get more data And I know you and I are at odds with this, but I do still think that Waymo is a big tourist attraction. And perhaps you could see Mayor Lori or some individual in the mayor's office that wants to tout this as as an economic growth engine. And perhaps they get curbside. And if Waymo gets curbside, boy, oh boy, watch out.
So here we have San Francisco representing maybe 50% of Waymo's rides, right? You know, California often criticized in terms of, you know, some of the politicians that are there. But meanwhile, on the other side of the coast, it's much worse. Like we can't, Grayson, in the great state of New York, can't now get this because our governor, Kathy Hochul, has pulled a proposal that would have allowed for robotaxi services outside New York City. And this is just a month after that she introduced it and touted, quote, New York open for business. What do you make of that had happened here?
New York closed for business. It's true. Look at the tax rate increase they're trying to pass in New York City. Businesses that are fleeing to Miami's not very positive, friendly business environment in New York City. And from the governor's perspective, from the state perspective, ring, ring, ring. Hello, special interest. Governor, you're not doing this. Ring, ring, ring. Governor, you're running for re-election. You want that donation? Not going to get it if you support this. Political pressure from special interest. The governor caved because a certain faction, she needs the support to win re-election. Without the support of a certain special interest, she can't win re-election. And based on many public, grandiose statements that have been made through press releases and in public forums around the United States, you know who this is. The governor clearly caved to political pressure. And frankly, it's a sad day for the residents of New York because this technology would have saved lives, improved the experience. Not to mention, it would have been an economic growth engine for a city and a state that absolutely desperately needs it right now.
Well, let me temper some of your arguments as the defender of New York. While I'm as outraged as you are by our governor's actions and, you know, the just basically putting people's lives in danger by not enabling a new technology. Let's be a little bit more realistic about this and reflect back on things that we've said about New York in the past, which is it's kind of hard. It's going to be hard for them to get power and service and the nuts and bolts to launch in this city anyway. So maybe by the time they're going to still look, Waymo and others will still work on the infrastructure to enable autonomy in New York. You know, by the time that either she's out of office or, you know, sees the light that this actually saves lives and improves the economy, maybe it will kind of coalesce, you know, with when the charging and service networks will be ready. But look, you know, we know that there's not enough capital, you know, going after this important third leg of the stool, which is service and charging. If you're the company that has the capital, like to your point, like why would I deploy it in New York when there's other areas that the politicians are welcoming, you know, this type of growth and welcoming a product that can save their citizens' lives?
I have the inspector hat on here because what we're going to do, we're going to watch for public filings and building permits to see if Move.io or another Waymo partner or Google Alphabet Real Estate starts to acquire energy assets in New York. But getting to your larger point, yes, you are going to see companies migrate to states that are friendlier. I'll give you the greatest example in the time I can give you. The autonomous trucking industry was built and developed in California. And California put undue regulations that you can't deploy a Class A truck on public roads. So what does the industry do? They took jobs and they moved all the commercialization to the Dallas-Fort Worth Triangle DFW. And that worked really well for them. And then with robotaxis, you're going to see those companies go to where they can operate. And the states and cities that are willing to welcome them are going to have a great economic impact, not to mention the quality of life increase and the amount of lives that are going to be saved. It's going to be positive. So I know you're in New York, Walt, but it's a sad day for the Empire State. The Empire is not friendly to technology.
Okay, before we tear too much into New York, let's go to a different state, Iowa, where lawmakers have advanced two bills from House subcommittees that would require a human behind the wheel. So this is not necessarily a red versus a blue issue. I mean, they're going to face autonomy companies are going to face challenges from a variety of different angles.
The autonomy companies are going to face it, but this is a series of tactics that certain special interest groups have used. They go to state houses, they rally support. Let's put driver in because, oh, if you get rid of the driver, it's going to eliminate jobs or it's going to kill jobs. Well, to the folks that are trying to pass that off as truth, there is economic data, including data from the United States Department of Transportation, that debunks that. Then the issue in Iowa is you have the other issue in Iowa is that you have the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. They're supposed to be pro-autonomy. They're out there using the Uber and Lyft talking points around hybrid networks. So on one side, this group that's lobbying for this is saying, yes, we need hybrid networks. They know autonomy is good. Iowa is a big basket of confusion as it relates to this policy. The pro-autonomy folks are now the hybrid folks. The traditional folks that don't like this, they're together. It's a hodgepodge of a hot mess.
Well, look, the one way we can solve all this, I assume, is a federal mandate. Like, where are we with, first of all, is that true? Like, if we have some type of national mandate, federal mandate, can that, displace what Hochul has made, harder to do now? And where are we with that process?
Preemption. A national autonomous vehicle framework will preempt state and local laws. Hochul will lose all of her power. The lobbyists in Iowa will lose all their power, and an autonomous vehicle will legally be able to go across state lines, county lines, city lines. As it relates to where we are, the bill that came out of committee in the House, I do not see a path forward as of today in the Senate. I do not necessarily see it going forward because we have a midterm election coming up and the gears are shifting now towards a midterm. And it's sad. What I like to be optimistic and see it go through. Oh yeah, I like to be the world's biggest cheerleader for this. Do I see it going through at this point? Unfortunately, I do not.
Well, there's still time on the clock. I'm not too disappointed because, we still do have to ramp volumes. We have to build the infrastructure. So it's not, I don't think, dramatically holding back the progress of the industry. It's just, like many things, a little disappointing on when things like this evolve. Let's shift over to Uber, which again, I wouldn't say I'm shocked, but I'd be a little surprised that Uber, who has long, kind of pushed this concept of like, hey, we don't want to be a part of servicing. We'll have minority stakes. We'll partner. We don't want to, they said they're not going to own cars long term. I get that they're buying some near term, but now there's a report out of Bloomberg that they're going to spend $100 million building fast charging autonomous vehicle charging stations. What do you make of this? By the way, this is San Fran, Los Angeles, and Dallas. 3 markets, obviously, there where autonomy is important.
Build and own. You listen to the past couple earnings calls from Uber. We want to be an asset-light company. The last quarterly call, we want to be an asset-light company. How are you going to be an asset-light company if you're owning assets? We have the SEC filing that Uber is going to own 20,000 plus Neuro, Lucid, Robotaxis. Now you're going to spend $100 million on infrastructure. I'm going to pull an M&M on you. Will the real Slim Shady please stand up? Please stand up. Will the real Uber please stand up? It seems to me that Uber's trying to figure out who they want to be. And not to mention, Walt, I thought they had partners, Waymo and Move, they've invested in, and they're on their cap table that was supposed to handle all of this.
I mean, Move and Waymo are the high-profile one. There's other ones that are kind of under the radar that Uber has made investments in and funded in order for fleets or infrastructure to be built. Those companies, they take some of this money and then they go out and try and raise additional money. So imagine you're one of those companies trying to raise additional companies or money to build out, again, charging and service, whatever. And the guy that's about to write you a check is like, well, wait a minute, are they building their own now? And I think it potentially creates some unnecessary questions at a time when maybe some of these companies are trying to raise some money.
It raises a lot of questions. And the question is, does Uber want to compete or do they want to invest? And the inspector hat's on here because in the Q4 supplement that Uber filed, on the last page, page 13 of the slide deck, we noticed something, Walt. For the fleet partners, Move.io was not listed there, even though Uber is very publicly on their cap table and they have given multiple press releases and spoken multiple times publicly about it. Move was not there. And you might wonder, oh, is Move out of the fleet business? No, they're very publicly Waymo's partner Miami, as you saw from the video I just put out. So it seems that there's a lot of moving pieces going on behind the scenes here.
So they're Waymo's partner in Miami. They're not necessarily Uber's partner in Miami, right? Therein lies the difference. And I just want to highlight a sentence from this report from Bloomberg that was, talking about this $100 million investment in power. It said the Uber spokesperson, declined to comment on whether Waymo may use the new chargers it plans to build in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and Dallas. They're talking about Uber here, right? The Uber's chargers, saying those sites are designed for cars that are on the Uber network.
Boom. The whole narrative that I said, and I stick by that a divorce is on the horizon. There's another very public point that points to a deteriorating relationship.
It was definitely interesting when you say decline to comment, but then also say that the sites are designed for cars on the Uber network. I mean, I don't know. It stands out. Maybe it was written incorrectly. I think the author is pretty good, and it was a tight overall story. Look, the other angle here is, Uber had previously made this big push for electric cars. Then I think they pulled back significantly in terms of where they were putting Teslas in their tiers and the money. And I know that they've been tweaking the spending strategy, or at least, again, according to this great Bloomberg article, they had a survey. Uber had a survey last year that drivers were concerned that, they didn't have access to charging. So maybe this whole $100 million investment has nothing to do with autonomy, and it's just trying to get more Uber drivers to be able to charge their electric cars. I'm skeptical. I think everything at that company is through the lens of preparing for a future in autonomy, and autonomy is very closely associated with electric, right? There's not many hybrid opportunities that are available to them. But is it possible we're overthinking this, and this is really just more about supporting the existing Uber driver network?
We're not overthinking it. Yes, does Uber publicly want to have more green vehicles on? Yes, but if you speak to drivers, the drivers like the hybrid vehicles. So the demand, and you just look at sales with the $25 to $50 billion of write-downs that American companies have taken on EV sales. So you have EV sales declining in America when Uber's saying that, oh, we're going to invest in charging. It doesn't add up. You and I know, and you clearly articulate it, this is for robotaxis. And so thinking about this, the markets that you listed, said, okay, so Dallas, they have the Hyundai Ioniq 5s running an AV ride. As we know from Niveus, there's 30 of those in the United States. So let's just say they're all in Dallas charging. And we do know that Neuro vehicles are coming online. Is this Uber getting ready to scale Neuro?
It could be. There's another interesting kind of tidbit out of this article that I'm going to just quote it and said, on Wednesday, Uber also announced that it had reached new deals with charger operators. These are third-party guys, right? To make charging more accessible to its drivers in electric vehicles. Just talked about that. Here's the key line. It's going to guarantee usage to these charging partners, meaning it's going to pay fines if Uber drivers don't realize certain utilization levels. Question, what does fine mean? To me, this sounds exactly like what's known as a take or pay contract, meaning if you give me a certain rate for charging, I will guarantee you a certain amount of usage, whether there's enough cars that drive there. The question about this sometimes, because I've seen these back in early device days where I think there was a shortage of gallium arsenide, and Ericsson, when they made phones, had these take or pay contracts with gallium arsenide guys. The question, sometimes you do that to block out the competition from getting this key resource. So I just wonder if any of these third-party relationships in any way maybe restrict people that are, wanting to charge their electric cars that are not on the Uber network. It's hard to know. We haven't seen the contracts, but it's just interesting wording on if you're willing to commit that much time. It could be just that they're committing all this charging just to get a good rate. That could be the on the surface issue without seeing the contracts. But sometimes you do stuff to block potential competitors from getting access to these key resources. In this case would be electric chargers.
It very well could be. And if reading the tea leaves, I'd be looking for two things. One, do we get a press release? Waymo set up Waymo Logistics underneath the Alphabet real estate arm, which is world class. Or two, do we get more announcements from Waymo for Move for more markets? And those two things will tell us a lot that can help answer the question that you rightly raised.
Well, again, I don't, they weren't on that chart, so they don't have any autonomous deals with Move today. This is Uber I'm talking about. So no, I would not expect that. Maybe you'll get more expansion from a Vomo, or they'll find some additional partners, or maybe this $100 million investment is kind of step one into a pivot to embracing the Lyft model, where you own it. And in the case of Lyft, it's Flex Drive, and they're obviously having to invest in Flex Drive to try and convert that to something that can handle autonomy. But definitely an interesting signpost or event for Uber to watch. Again, could just be, hey, just chargers for our existing rideshare customers. But given the autonomy focus that's going on at that company right now, I don't know. It feels to me like a bit of a pivot. And by the way, we have to applaud them for it, because this is, what I think you and I, some of the things that we agree upon. We don't agree upon everything, but we do think that owning that leg, it would be helpful to the rideshare guys.
It would be extremely helpful to Uber to own the infrastructure, and I would go as far to own a fleet management company, and then to own the vehicle as such. Which, if you want to call it a land grab or a dash for energy, what type of competitive advantage does that give Tesla as they scale Robotaxi with all their energy infrastructure assets around the world?
I mean, we've talked about that before, and I think I have the same questions here. They talk about finding chargers, but are they getting locations that can also handle cleaning? We've seen them both, right? We've seen areas where it's just charge, and we've seen areas where they're doing service. It's fine to have charging areas. I mean, the issue with Tesla is, like, I've been to some of the chargers, like they're in the parking lot of an IKEA. Like, I don't know if that can be fenced off and specifically used for cybercabs. Like, I don't know how that is going to work. But speaking of charging on cybercabs, that's a good segue to our next topic, which is, it's not that the first cybercab came off the line at Giga. That's great news. It's, my good friends over at the FCC issued an order that's they're going to be able to use ultra wideband radio technology to wirelessly charge the system. And basically what this means is the car pulls in and there's a mat, and on the bottom of the car communicates via wireless, basically charging wirelessly as it hovers over this mat for the Cybercab. So well done at the FCC. This thing's been out there since this is not new. I know some of the people that follow Tesla think it's like new. And I mean, this has been going on since 24, July of 24 to be specific. It was out for comment in early 25. So it's good that the order finally hit yesterday.
Put your telco hat on. We have to get you a hat that says Walt's Telco Corner. For us non-FCC, non-telco people, why did the FCC have to get involved to allow this to happen?
I mean, you're using we're using RF to do the charging. I mean, there was a company I visited years ago, like 10 years ago, Witricity, that talked about this very thing. I remember them saying, like, one of the challenges was you pull your car into your garage, and if a cat happened to like sit in between, or a mouse, maybe that wouldn't be necessarily good in between the charging things. So they had to set up things to turn off the electricity. There was, I think it was Korea, they had buses that at every bus stop, it would charge momentarily to get to the next bus stop in order to charge these electric cars. Believe it or not, Grayson, there was a product where you could do a slow leak of power into your phone. You'd have a charger basically sitting on your, on a cabinet somewhere, and it would slowly charge it via what these is when you're using, radio frequencies. This is under, what the FCC in this country obviously controls. So they have to get involved. It's pretty interesting stuff.
Now, the Tesla has, if I'll use the term permit, does that allow them to go anywhere in the United States? Or is that geographically limited? How does that?
I haven't looked in the details of this, but FCC, enables things on a national basis. And again, this is like radio frequencies between something that's sitting on the ground and a car that's above it. I'm sure if you look in the details for these things that I've mentioned, there's some safety issues that are addressed By the way, one of the ones that I remember reading about, I don't know if Electricity was doing this, but you'd have like solar panels up in space, and then you'd have to spot beam it down to a receiver on Earth, but you just got to hope that nothing flies in between. I may be misremembering that. But there's, this is again part of just technology advancement, and certainly when you think about this concept of like, hey, the Robotaxi backing in and having like a robot plug it in, you don't necessarily need some robot to plug it in like you've talked about on past episodes. You're just sitting over a wireless charger and you're good to go.
No matter how you want to cut the pie, it's becoming very clear based on the Cybercab coming off the line, the FCC approval. Tesla's getting ready to scale Robotaxi quickly, quickly, quickly.
So what do you make of that first Cybercab coming off the line on February 17th?
I think it's a positive, but I just want to damper expectations for the motoring public. Tesla still has to get a NHTSA exemption to operate without a steering wheel and without pedals. And then after that, they're going to have to get another permit that will allow them to charge. That's little, if you want to call it, that little area that Zoox is in right now, because they do not have pedals or steering wheel. So really great engineering feat. It's coming. Do they get the exemption? Probably at some point. I don't want to give a prediction because I don't know when. But you will have them rolling out free rides in the Cybercab and, let's say, the limited Austin ODD by, I don't know, say Halloween.
I don't like how hesitant you are about this exemption for the Cybercab. I'm sensing some concern here that NHTSA is not, pro technology and pro development. I mean, how are they fine with someone, having a Tesla Y on the road with no driver? Like, what difference is it when there's no wheel there? If there's no driver there, there's no one to grab a wheel anyway.
We're very fortunate as the American public to have a great administrator, Mr. Morrison, at NHTSA. It really just comes down to, and you know this very well from your FCC and your telco work, old regulations that are outdated that have to get brought into compliance with modern day standards. That's really what this comes down to.
Fine, but I think one of the things we've seen with most of the agencies under the new administration is cutting through that bureaucracy quickly. Definitely, that's the case at the FCC.
I think Mr. Carr at the FCC has done a fantastic job, and he's doing really, really good work there. The outlying thing on this is that we know that Mr. Musk and President Trump are getting along again. Does the president try and put his thumb on the scale and tip it forward quickly? I don't know. I'm just saying that is a possibility.
And look, before we worry about the Cybercab, let's get those the Tesla Ys scaled up in Austin in the first place. Let's get that done. And then once that's done, I don't see any reason why the follow on for Cybercab should be shortly thereafter. So we'll see. What else we got?
We'll see. And we're looking forward to seeing Tesla scale Model Ys to more cities there. What else we have is we're going to autonomous trucking. We don't have a foreign autonomy desk this week because in the Middle East they're celebrating Ramadan. So we won't get any releases out of the Middle East for at least 30 days until the end of Ramadan. What we do for autonomous trucking, Aurora opened a new lane. They're going over 1,000 miles from Texas to Arizona. Just set expectations. There are still safety drivers because that's what PACCAR demands they have there in the vehicle. But really good lane for Aurora to open up. And what Aurora is doing is validating that autonomous trucking is scaling.
I mean, this is just kind of follow on from earnings. We've talked about, what I learned about what a lane is versus not a lane is. So yeah, it's, Aurora's kind of pushing forward. Obviously it's going to be a lot of upfitting this year. So we'll have to keep tabs and hopefully visit with our buddies over at Volvo to find out what's going on there. And, good for Aurora to open up a new lane.
It's very good for Aurora. And this came, an individual on X sent us this, and we pulled it up. And PACCAR's latest earnings release, I almost fell out of my chair. They were touting their partnership of Driver Out with Kodiak. That was a big milestone there. Maybe PACCAR is potentially loosening up as as autonomous trucking scales.
I haven't had a chance to take a look at that, but I look forward to chatting with our friends from at PACCAR at down in Texas in a couple of weeks.
We'll be there. Well, you and I are in Texas in a couple weeks. I know what you're doing next week. The audience doesn't know what you're doing next week. Besides you having Walt time, what do we need to look for in the autonomy markets for next week?
I apologize for those that watch this as opposed to listen to it. I've been just getting bad enough to have to look, but I've gotten just pale over the weeks. It's been a brutal winter here in New York. Getting a little sun, so hopefully we can tan it up a little bit. Conference season is kicking off, so you never know what type of new information gets released there. And as always, I think, our friends at Waymo, at Uber, and at Tesla seem to always generate some new news for us every week.
There's always news every week. Walt will be back, I'll say, refreshed and ready to rock and roll next week. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is scaling. Walt, until next week.